You are about to witness the most devastating act of retaliation ever unleashed against a corrupt HOA president. Imagine coming home to find a woman you barely know, who happens to chair your neighborhood board, has successfully faked an emergency 911 call, conned first responders, and actually broken into your private residence, changing the locks behind her, all over a $15 potted plant. What she didn't realize, what no one in this upscale manicured community ever realized, was that the quiet, unassuming neighbor she just evicted was actually a decorated, high-ranking detective, and she just handed him all the legal ammunition he needed to not just end her reign, but to end her life in that neighborhood, and possibly end her career. This is the moment Karen realized she messed with the wrong house. Welcome back, truth seekers. If you're here for the absolute pinnacle of neighborhood justice and sweet, sweet revenge, you know what to do. Smash that like button until it cracks. Hit subscribe right now and ring that notification bell. We dive into the drama in 3, 2, 1, ... Let's go. Our protagonist, let's call him Op, is a man whose career requires discipline, discretion, and a profound respect for the law. He's a detective, an actual police officer, and he lives in a notoriously tight-laced, exclusive planned community governed by the Kensington Oaks Homeowners Association, or KHOA. The KHOA president, naturally, is our villain, Dolores Ainsworth, a woman whose entire personality seemed forged in the fires of petty bureaucracy and entitlement. Dolores was, to put it mildly, an absolute tyrant. She viewed the KHOA bylaws not as guidelines for community living, but as a personal manifesto to exert control over her neighbors' lives. The initial conflict, the tiny spark that would eventually ignite this inferno, was laughably small. Opa had placed a small decorative ceramic planter filled with succulents on the common area sidewalk just outside the 3-foot perimeter of his own property. It was a beautiful piece, totally innocuous, a splash of life in an otherwise beige conforming landscape. Rule 4.2 states that all decorative elements must be contained within the immediate property line. The planter was a mere 6 inches over the line. Op received his first violation notice, a boilerplate letter, on a Tuesday. He planned to move it that weekend, figuring he had a few days. But Dolores doesn't operate on reason or patience. She operates on immediate, total dominance. Less than 24 hours later, a second notice arrived, this one threatening a $500 fine. Op, slightly annoyed, simply moved the planter onto his porch. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. The following morning, his wife called him panicked while he was on a difficult case downtown. She had opened the front door to find an official-looking KHOA document taped to the wall right next to the doorframe, not even on. The door accusing them of willful and malicious disregard for community standards and demanding immediate payment of the $500 fine plus a $250 administrative fee for what Dolores termed a repeat, flagrant offense. The fine was now $750 over a plant that had been moved. Op immediately called Dolores, who refused to answer. He left a calm, professional voicemail stating he would be disputing the fine, citing the prompt removal of the item, and would be formally requesting a hearing. This was his first mistake, expecting rationality from a despot. That voicemail, and the mere suggestion of a challenge to her authority, flipped a switch in Dolores's mind. She didn't just want the fine paid. She wanted OP humiliated, crushed, and driven out. The quiet detective, focused on his job, had no idea the monster he had just awakened, a monster who was already plotting a catastrophic illegal move to permanently settle the score. Dolores's reaction was swift, staggering, and utterly unhinged. She saw OP's measured resistance not as a valid dispute, but as a declaration of war against her, the self-proclaimed Queen of Kensington Oaks. Her first step was to mobilize the KHOA Enforcement Committee, a group she had handpicked from the most zealous busybodies in the neighborhood. They descended upon OP's property, not to assess the planter issue, but to nitpick every single aspect of his home's exterior. Over the course of the next week, Op and his wife received 4 new violation notices, one for the unapproved shade of beige on their mailbox, one for a protruding gutter section, one for excessive front lawn moss, and the final, most insane one, for unauthorized use of decorative holiday lighting. It was a small string of fairy lights his wife had left up on the back patio. The fines totaled over ling ling ling. Now, deeply frustrated, hired a lawyer specializing in HOA disputes, and they filed an official restraining order request against Dolores, citing targeted harassment. This legal maneuver was the catalyst for Dolores's final catastrophic act. On a Friday afternoon, while Op was at the precinct and his wife was out of town visiting family, Dolores executed her plan. Using a burner phone, she called 911. The dispatcher, concerned, heard a trembling voice claiming to be a neighbor reporting a suspected gas leak and possible structural compromise at OP's address. She claimed the occupants were away and she saw smoke. She knew OP was police, so she fabricated a scenario that would necessitate immediate forced entry by non-police emergency services. The fire department arrived first, and due to the reported gas leak, they immediately called in a professional locksmith. Dolores, waiting around the corner, sauntered up, flashed a forged document she'd prepared, claiming to be the authorized property manager, acting on the absentee owner's behalf in an emergency, and convinced the locksmith to change the front and back door locks to new, unique keys she was given. Once the new locks were installed, and the fire department confirmed no smoke or gas leak, Dolores didn't leave. She stood there, bold as brass, accepted the keys, and instructed the locksmith to bill the KHOA emergency fund. She then, unbelievably, took a can of red spray paint and scrawled the word condemned across the front garage door. She effectively evicted a homeowner, a police officer, from his own home, using a fraudulent 911 call and a forged document, all over a $15 planter. Ope returned home late that night, tired and ready for bed, only to find a red-painted home, new locks, and a chilling voicemail from his own lawyer. "Ope, call me now. Dolores just committed a felony. He tried his key. It wouldn't turn. He was locked out of his own house, standing on the curb, staring at the word condemned, realizing the depth of the illegal operation launched by his HOA president. He was helpless, stranded, and completely defeated. For now, helplessness is not a state a decorated detective remains in for long. Op's initial shock gave way to a cold, surgical fury. The fact that Dolores had fabricated an emergency, involved first responders, and committed breaking and entering was not just a civil KHOA violation. It was a criminal act, specifically criminal trespass and filing a false police report. The moment OP called his lawyer and then his precinct chief, the game was over for Dolores. The immediate resolution was stunningly swift. As a law enforcement officer, OP was not limited to civil court. He gathered the evidence: the locksmith's invoice which named Dolores, the 911 call recording which his police contacts immediately and legally obtained, the fire department's official report noting no leak, no fire, and the intervention of an unnamed property manager, and the high-resolution surveillance footage from his own exterior cameras, which Dolores hadn't noticed or thought to disable, showing her personally supervising the lock change and spray painting his garage. Within 24 hours, Ops Precinct filed a formal report and warrant request. The next morning, a patrol car pulled up to Dolores Ainsworth's immaculate house, and she was arrested on camera in front of the entire neighborhood on charges of falsifying a police report and criminal mischief. The sight of Dolores, the Queen of Kensington Oaks, being led away in handcuffs, weeping and protesting, was the first wave of satisfaction. The core resolution came in a lightning-fast emergency KHOA board meeting, called by the remaining horrified board members. Ops' lawyer presented the evidence. Dolores had used the KHOA emergency fund to pay for her criminal trespass. She had exposed the entire KHOA to massive liability by involving emergency services under false pretenses. The board, terrified of lawsuits, immediately and unanimously voted to remove Dolores as president, ban her from holding any future KHOA position, and, critically, agreed to pay up $25,000 in damages for the locks, paint, and emotional distress, all funded from the KHOA's general fund. The victory was total and swift, but Op wasn't done. The public humiliation was only phase one. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Dolores. The day after her arrest, local news stations, alerted to the story of the HOA president arrested for home invasion, descended on Kensington Oaks. Op, though discreetly, had ensured the facts of the arrest, the fake 911 call, the planter, the spray paint, were all public knowledge. Dolores's reputation, the very foundation of her petty power, was instantly annihilated. She was the laughingstock of a city that previously respected her and her husband, who was a local real estate broker. Her husband, who was facing a career-ending crisis due to her actions, filed for divorce 4 days later, citing irreconcilable differences and potential financial liability. The $25,000 settlement from the KHOA was only the beginning of OP's payback. OP's lawyer filed a separate, massive civil lawsuit against Dolores personally, not for the KHOA damage, but for defamation, emotional distress, and the cost of the $4,000 of spurious fines she had levied against him. The lawsuit stipulated a punitive damage request of $500,000. More devastatingly, OP had a secondary calculated payback move. He leveraged his professional contacts in a little-known city ordinance regarding aesthetic and structural blight. Because Dolores had failed to maintain the common areas surrounding her own property, OP, using the official KHOA minutes he was now privy to, initiated the city's highest level of aesthetic enforcement against her. This resulted in Dolores receiving a staggering, non-negotiable $1,000 per day fine until the violations were cured. The violations included unauthorized common area overgrowth, non-compliant lawn color, and structural integrity concern over an aging patio. She is literally being fined to death by the very bureaucratic system she had weaponized against others. The best part? The former KHOA board, still trying to appease OP and cover their own backsides, voted to not intervene or waive the fines, stating publicly that the KHOA would now enforce all rules fairly and without prejudice, starting with former officers. Dolores was left with the $500,000 lawsuit, the city's daily fines, her shattered marriage, and a neighborhood that actively scorned her. But the final, most satisfying blow was yet to land. The final nail in Dolores's meticulously manicured coffin was not a legal judgment, but a social and financial one. The civil lawsuit settled inevitably for $350,000 in OP's favor, forcing Dolores and her ex-husband to sell their sprawling, custom-built KHOA home to cover the debt. The city fines alone had reached over $90,000 by the time the house was listed. But OP had one final, exquisite twist of the knife. Because of his involvement in the KHOA and his position as a respected community member and the fact that he was owed money, he had the inside track on the sale. He didn't buy the house himself, but he ensured that the property was purchased by a couple who were infamous in the local real estate circles for their deliberate, high-impact non-compliance with HOA rules. They were known to paint their houses neon colors, park multiple broken-down vehicles on their lawn, and generally treat all rules with utter contempt. The contract for sale was finalized, and the new owners, a couple named the Wilds, moved in exactly 1 month after Dolores was forced to vacate. Dolores, now living in a rental apartment across town, would occasionally drive back to the neighborhood for the sheer morbid curiosity of seeing the place she lost. The first thing the Wilds did was paint their new home, Dolores's old palace, a vivid shade of day-glow orange. Then, they parked a vintage rust-covered pickup truck on blocks in the front yard. The final spectacular act of secondary revenge came when the Wilds, having heard the full story from OP, who dropped a large anonymous gift basket on their porch, erected a magnificent custom-made ceramic planter outside their front door, planter nearly 10 feet wide, shaped like a gargantuan laughing skull, and filled with a thriving, unruly collection of weeds and wildflowers. It was 6 feet over the property line. OP had not only escaped Dolores's tyranny, but had personally replaced her reign of terror with a monument to aesthetic anarchy. Ensuring that every day Dolores saw the news or heard about the neighborhood, she would be reminded that her former home was a screaming testament to her own downfall. The KHOA board, now terrified of the Wilds, had completely given up on enforcement. Peace, albeit a highly customized, chaotic peace, had returned to Kensington Oaks, and OPA, the quiet detective, was universally hailed as the hero who had finally laid the Queen of Karen's law. And that is the story of how an innocent, succulent planter led to the absolute demolition of an HOA tyrant. What was the most shocking moment for you? The fake 911 call? The day-glow orange paint job? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this deep dive into sweet, sweet justice, make sure you subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter of neighborhood drama.